Good evening, everyone. Christopher Ruocchio here of Sun Eater, back with another live stream. This for December, the last month of the year, guys. Man, it that happened fast. I know I do that like every update, but this year, at least every time I do these updates, it feels like the year just went very fast. Of course, every single day has been about 400 days a piece. So weird year. Time is weird. Before I get too far into it, a couple of things. There will be hardcovers of books 4, 5, and 6 next year. I promise. They're reprinting them. It's okay. It'll happen. I'm just saying that at the beginning of the video. Yeah. Anyway, good to see everybody. Yeah, it's been a busy time. I know a bunch of people want to hear about Dragonsteel. Dragonsteel is great. My furnace died, as Jeff is saying here, while I was gone. So my poor wife had to deal with that. So that was could have been less stressful, that's for sure. But the con itself went very well. I got to see a bunch of y'all. Got to see a bunch of YouTube people as well. I met the Tutor Ramble guys, Richard and Austin. Sorry, Richard. I saw Jake Bishop. I saw Benghis Khan. I saw Pedrick, of course. Had dinner with Daniel Green. That was cool. Met his fiance too. She's Kayla. Very nice. Very, very nice to meet both of them. And who else did I meet? On the writer side of things, I mean, I saw Jeff, of course. They actually had to throw Jeff out. They were closing the floor early, and they were they had to throw Jeff out the door. Sorry, Jeff. But did I buy any books? I did not. I never buy anything at conventions, really. I bought a stuffed animal for my daughter. That was about it. And I got a candle. But no, I didn't buy any books. It's when you are a writer, people kind of give them to you. I have a lot of books that publishers will send me and stuff, so it's not as imminent for me. But then writer wise, of course, I saw Larry Correa. I saw Steve Diamond, shared a booth with them. Saw my friend Jason Cordova. I saw Brian Lee Durfee, who's doing great, man. It was so good to see Brian after, people don't know, Brian was very sick, and he was like himself again. It's actually strange. He's a lot less stoic. I always say that Brian in person is a lot more stoic, but he was in really high spirits. It was really good to see Brian. I love that guy, and I'm just so glad he's okay. I saw some of my other writer friends. I met Fonda Lee briefly. She was sort of like across from me. And she came over and said hello, which was cool. And I did meet Brandon for about 30 seconds, because I know somebody's gonna ask, and that was cool. That was cool. Yeah, let's see, Ben's here too. Saw Ben. But yeah, things went really, really well, which was great. Had a giant lion the first day, which was super fun. It was a lot. I was saying I hadn't done a convention in a big convention in about 3 years, I think, maybe 2 years. The last time I did a show, I sold 30 books in a weekend, and I had to really try to sell those books, and that was not the experience this time. Basically, everybody knew who I was. I didn't have to explain the books to anybody. That was very cool. Did I duke it out with Brandon over the paper issue? No, but I did get to meet the printer. He was there. His name is Bill. I got to meet Bill, which was very cool. Really nice guy. I really enjoyed working with Bill. And so we had a laugh about the whole paper situation and everything. So no, it was great. And then I got back and have been dealing with publishing business, trying to get my head back in the game. I effectively haven't worked on book 7 in about 2 weeks, which is very rough. So I think I'm actually gonna have to go back about a chapter and a half and restart the battle just to get my head back into the game. But I've been sort of re-examining my outline and seeing what I can do, just to sort of smooth the end. We're getting close. I've spent the last 2 days finally sort of not sorted out, but I've gotten to where a bunch of the other stuff I was working on is kind of stable. And I am working on sort of re-outlining of the end here, just to sort of adjust things. And yeah, I'm hoping probably at this point it'll probably be like the tail end of January or very early February that I finish the book. I would suspect that it'll be February at this point, but we'll see. It's going okay. It's in hand, but it's as you might imagine, the ending is complicated. So let's see. Try to get down to business as usual here. Happy holidays. Thank you. To evening, everybody. Isaac says, "Do I have any funny stories from Dragon Seal?" No funny stories. Really, no. It was very cool to see everybody. Had a very good time. I had hoped to do a signing outside of the convention, but that ended up not being possible. And so I had an extra day, and I went down to Provo and hung out with DJ Butler for a bit, which was great. He lives down that way, and it was awesome. I had breakfast with Patrick before I got on the plane to the airport. That was cool. Patrick flew all the way out from Indonesia. It was first time in America, so that was kind of awesome. And Utah, honestly, Utah sort of is it's not what people think of when they think of America, but it's such a beautiful part of the world, man. It was so dry, though. It was so dry. I guess that's funny. I'm fundamentally a swamp creature, right? North Carolina is mostly marshes, and so I could feel all of the moisture leaving my body. It was like going to Arrakis. It was so dry. So everybody was dying. I felt like a fish, a dying fish, the whole weekend. Noah, good to meet you, man. Was I a hotspot at Dragon Seal? Would have gone just for you. Was I a hotspot? I'm not sure what that means exactly, but it was good. Like I had a line for a long time. I basically couldn't stop talking the whole time I was at the booth. It was just, just stuff happening constantly, which was great. It was a good problem to have. I had to go hide to eat, which was a new experience for me. Any extra signings in my neck of the woods? Well, I will be at the Barnes & Noble in Cary, North Carolina on January 29th in the evening. I can't remember if it's 6 or 7 o'clock for their book club. They are reading Empire of Silence next month. So I'll be doing a little bit of a signing and then kind of, I guess, hanging out with the book club. I don't know what the format is going to be. I don't think it's very formal or anything. So if you are in my neck of the woods, I will be there and would love to see you. There's Jeff. Sorry to 3 out, man. That was not fun. Brandon Sanderson wanted to come in and thank all the vendors, so they let everyone. They made everybody leave 10 minutes early, and they threw poor Jeff out while we were talking. But it's it's conventions. It's how it is, right? The con was great. It was a great show. They did a really, really nice job. It was in the big, it's called Salt Palace, the big convention center downtown. And that's where they do Salt Lake City FanX, which is a great convention if you're in the western part of the U.S. at all. I think it's the 3rd biggest Comic-Con behind New York and San Diego. It's I think it's about 100,000 people. And that's great. There's a lot of writers there. Utah has a very strong writing community. In part because of BYU's fantasy program, right? They just have a lot of writers out there. So you got a lot of local writers and a lot of folks will come in, but it's a big media con. So I'm out there. I've been out there for FanX several times. I love that show. So it was in the same spot and they just did a great job. It was great production. I didn't go to any panels. I was at the booth the whole time. So, it's, it was great. Let's see. Derby does have the best TV show in the entire universe. It is true. Domino the Great asks, sort of a spoiler question. Can I please elaborate on Karn Sagara? Which manifestation, in my opinion, is the evil one? I can't really answer that question, really, because I don't want to sort of tilt your perceptions or color the book. I am sort of very dubious of Karn's methods generally, let's say. So the question really is which one is worse? And I don't want to answer that question. But does Brandon Sanderson know I hate his magic systems? It's not that I hate his magic systems precisely, right? And no, he doesn't. He didn't know who I was, which was sort of surprising to me, which was kind of cool. But it's not like a personal thing. I have nothing against the man at all. I do not like hard magic systems because I do not like the way they have tilted the sort of perception of how fantasy ought to be. Whenever I push back against hard magic, right, people sort of will sneer and they think that soft magic is lazy or sloppy. And the problem that I have fundamentally is that hard magic, so-called, I was on a podcast. I was on the I Might Believe in Fairies podcast with Aaron Erber and a couple other guys. Nicholas Kotar was there, Richard Rowland, and we were talking about this. And because every time I push back, right, it's not that soft magic is asystematic, right? It doesn't have a system. That's like the wrong way to think about it. It's a question of what kind of system, right? And hard magic is fundamentally Newtonian, right? It's interested in questions of energy, right? How much energy do I need to put into the system? Where is that energy coming from in order to get the energy output? This is magic for people whose brains have been programmed by modern science, right? And I'm not disparaging modern science, but magic, as understood in sort of traditional practices, in religious studies, in occult studies, right, is not Newtonian. It is not interested in questions of energy input. The relationship between cause and effect is analogical. It's not in terms of energy levels. And so we are writing fantasy systems that are actually science fiction systems. And this is a problem because actually I think that there is a lot of sort of interesting thought and there's also a lot of interesting space in storytelling for magic that is actually magical, that is analogical, that is more closely grounded in the sort of religious and folkloric practices of our own history, instead of what we have, right, which is a lot of fantasy books that are based on ideas from other fantasy books. And this is true in science fiction to a certain extent as well. And I'm certainly also guilty of it, right? Like Sun Eater is largely based on ideas that I got from reading other science fiction novels, but it is not only that, I hope. And when I take a stab at fantasy, I expect that I will not be writing fantasy in this vein at all. And what really bothers me about this, besides sort of just this sort of cultural prejudice, I would rather we write magic systems that hove closer to traditional folkloric and religious practices. But it is also the fact that people will listen to Sanderson's lectures or something and think that's the only way to write, or that that's the best way to write a fantasy book. And it's not. It is neither of those things. It is great, right? And those books are very appealing, obviously. And it is super fun. Like, look, I really love sort of when you read like Name of the Wind, right? And I remember when he sort of quenches all the fires in the village by like binding the scale to a wheel. Was it a wheel? I don't remember. And like all the fires go out, right, as sort of the fuel for that spell. Like, that's very cool, and it's intellectually appealing. That's great. I understand, right? The appeal in hard magic is that you, the reader, are trying to like figure out how the system works, because if you can figure out how to exploit it, then you're a good wizard, right? By the measure of that universe, right? And that's very attractive to you as a reader. It's I hate the phrase power fantasy because it's usually used abusively by people who are trying to belittle people. But there is a sort of a, you get to imagine that you are a great wizard thing that comes out of that. And I don't I've never read like that. But I see the appeal, right? I just have different interests as a writer, and so yeah. So no, someone said before I went, it's like, don't you hate that guy? Like, no, I'd never met him until this weekend. He was very nice to me. So no, I'm not a hard magic guy. There's a difference, Anyway, any plans to see the new Nosferatu? 100%. Yeah, no, Eggers is he's one of very few directors for me. Yeah, that I look forward to. I really like The Northman. I love Lighthouse. I don't love The Witch so much. I know that's like, that's the first big one, right? And it's like or maybe it was his first movie, period. I maybe did a couple of indie features. I can't remember. But I didn't like The Witch so much because of what it was saying. I like The Lighthouse a lot. I like The Northman a lot. So no, I'm super looking forward to Nosferatu. I want to see the Lord of the Rings film, which I understand is getting pretty mixed reception, which is unfortunate. But I love Kenji Kamiyama, and so I'm want to go see both of those. Did Brandon know about the Sun Eater books? Yeah, he did. He knew who I was. Okay, this is a funny story, actually. So he and Steve Diamond are old friends. So he's talking to Steve, and I wasn't going to interrupt, right? I was, giving him space. And he had like a whole, like, little coterie. He had like bodyguards and stuff. And his head of security, it turns out, like Sun Eater, which was very cool. So I was talking to Brandon's bodyguard, and he likes Sun Eater, so that's cool. But no, he knew. Yeah, Brandon knew who I was, and he said he'd heard that I'd done very well at the convention, which was cool. And that we had a lot of readers in common, which is totally true. I thought it was interesting that news had gone all the way up there, but yeah, it was cool. It was cool. It was cool to meet him. It was literally for like 30 seconds. Domino, no, book 7 does not come out in February. I will finish writing the first draft in February. No. I will finish writing it, and then it needs to get edited, and then it needs to get copy edited, and it needs to get printed. It'll be like the end of next year, unless there's some problems. But I'm close to finish writing it. Related question. Sorry, I had to skip that one because that was a big question. I skipped a couple questions. I'll go back for the other one. Related question from our guy Albert here. How long do I think it'll be? The first draft will be about 415,000 words, which is way too long. So we will try to edit that down. I suspect that Dave and I will probably be able to remove something like 70,000 words from this one, given how many words we removed from book 6. And I know a lot of people get squirrely when they hear me say that. You're like, oh, you're taking book away, right? That's like that's not really like how it works, right? Like when we cut words out of Disquiet Gods, we didn't remove any scenes. We actually added scenes. We added a whole chapter. We removed a bunch of rambling and like false starts and repetitive sentences and things like that. And I found, as I have actually matured as a writer, I do that more. And so it is very important to me that we go through and we clean things out. So my suspicion is that the final draft will be something on the order of 330,000 words would be an approximate guess. That's my aspiration. It might end up slightly longer than that. It will still be the longest book in the series, no matter what happens. At this point, there's no real avoiding that. What is my favorite Bond movie? That is a good question. From Russia with Love is right up there. Of the modern films, the Craig films, Casino Royale, it's not even hard. I am a 90s kid. GoldenEye is great. And I kind of like both of the Timothy Dalton movies because I think in a certain sense he's closest to the book character. And Timothy Dalton is also super underrated. But of the Brosnan films, GoldenEye easy. Most of the others aren't even close to good. But sort of similar with the Craig films. Skyfall is pretty good. I think it's slightly overpraised. But Skyfall is great. Sam Mendes is a tremendous director, though. 1917 is a masterpiece. Yeah, I lean Casino Royale of the 5 Craig films, but of all time, probably From Russia with Love. I'm not like a Bond like super fan or aficionado or anything, so this is a very casual opinion. But yeah. Yeah, just to reiterate, I will finish working on book 7 in February. It will probably come out like October, November, December. Wish you had my optimism, or Domino's. Have I written or am I planning any Chantry POV short stories? Yeah, I've written one called Victim of Changes. It's in Tales of the Sun Eater Volume 1. I would like to do more. It's a pretty low level member of the Chantry in that story. But Woods, haven't read any Sun Eater yet, but love the Broken Binding editions. I'm glad to support you. Well, thank you. I appreciate you taking a risk on the Broken Binding versions. They actually, for anybody who did not get one and would like to get a set from the Broken Binding, they are on sale still. The second round, probably because we're super close to Christmas, has not moved nearly as fast as the first, and they have plenty to spare at the moment, and they will be putting out more in February. So they'll do 8,000 total, and they've sold about, of those, between the first and second printing, I think around 5,000 so far. So you've got a chance. So Matthew asked, was wondering how much influence the old Star Wars EU books influenced Sun Eater. See, also feel a lot like the Usain Vaughn. I could totally see why you would say that. So I only ever read Vector Prime, and I really didn't like it, which is a pretty of those books, of the Yuuzhan Vong books. I only ever read Vector Prime, and I really really didn't like it. The Cielson, I was not thinking about the Yuuzhan Vong at all when I was thinking about the Cielson, but I can 100% see why you would think that. But I have very little to do with that part of the EU. I read the Young Jedi Academy books, the Kevin Anderson ones. My dad read to me when I was a kid. I think the first book I ever purchased with my own money was Heir to the Empire, maybe. So I read those. That might not be. That was an early book for sure, but I don't know if that was the first one. I read a lot of the like young Obi-Wan like kids books, like chapter books, as well. And then I read like the novelizations and some of the like Clone War adjacent stuff. I read like Labyrinth of Evil or is it Labyrinth of Fear, something like that. There's like a little trilogy they made around Revenge of the Sith, with Revenge of the Sith being the middle one. The Revenge of the Sith novelization, I've said this like 10,000 times, is a masterpiece. I absolutely adore that book. Matthew Stover's genius. I read Shatterpoint because of that. I read his Magic the Gathering novel because of that, but I weirdly never read Acts of Cain because I'm a goofball. So I need to go do that one of these days. But I think Matthew Stover's super great, absolute genius. And then I read Rogue Squadron and stuff, right? The X-Wing books, Mike Stackpole. But that was like pretty early. Most of my Star Wars reading I did in like middle school, and by the time I got to high school, I'd moved on to like Dune, and I'd moved on to it was in high school I did a lot of my like old science fiction reading because I had this teacher who's an old fan, like world con attending kind of fan, capital F fan. And so I read a lot of like Van Vogt, and that was when I got into like C.L. Moore and Lee Brackett and like all those older writers. And into sort of names that people are more likely to read, like that's when I read Neuromancer in high school. So the Star Wars stuff was like super early. Yes, no, swamp. I'm a swamp person. Climatically, at least, Raleigh is like right on the edge of the coastal plain. From like my part of North Carolina east, it's basically all like flatlands and marshes, and then from where I am west, it's basically all foothills and then the Appalachian Mountains. So I'm like right on the edge. Nameless Fool asks, should mankind choose their own anatomical symbol? In the vein of Sirianni's hand, which appendage would they lord over the Cielson? It's an excellent question. I leave that to depends on the humans in question. We got a super chat though. Let's see. Shazbot, thank you. Is the painted man's look inspired by Leto's Joker? I asked because he covers his mouth with a smile. Yes, and a smile appears in his hand. That particular little bit was, but there are a couple other pieces. I thought that was such wasted potential. That little thing. But the movie's such a mess. But I thought that was cool. The rest of it, no. But I thought that was cool. But no, based on he's a shapeshifter, right? Like I just had a shapeshifter, and I thought that would be cool. There's a little bit. The name is sort of a Bradbury reference, for example. There's a lot of like little pieces. I hate to really break these things down like that because I think it like sort of ruins things. But yes, in this case, I will say that much. Gonna be hard to get you to Phoenix if the dryness bothers you. It is rough, dude. It is a big change. I think I have to like triple the amount of water that I drink under normal circumstances. Since Dragon Steel was a bigger convention, do you prefer really big or busy cons or something small? I prefer the bigger ones. Financially speaking, the bigger ones make sense, right? If you go to a smaller convention, the odds that you will lose money on that convention are pretty high, right? So like I go to a small convention if I'm invited, especially if something if they cover something, frankly, right? Because it's very expensive to buy books. I mean, I ran out of Empire of Silences on day 2 at Dragonsteel, and I was like super nervous about how many I'd ordered. Like it was expensive, and I could have ordered more, but it was a lot. And so smaller conventions, the odds of you not making back your investment on the convention are pretty high. Now that may not be your goal. You could just go to socialize or something, and that's like totally great. You should go if you're invited, or if you want to travel. But for me, this may shock you because I'm a writer, but I am pretty introverted, which is not to say that I can't like hold a conversation or function in a social environment. But once I have done that, like I'm brain dead. So like this is part of the problem. I was at the convention for 6 days, traveling, I think it was a 3-day show, but traveled, I took an extra day and then I had to travel back. And then I came home and I didn't work for like another 5. Like it's very hard for me to do this. So there needs to be like a pretty good reason for me to go. And I like the bigger conventions too. I don't know how to say this quite right. There's less sort of industry politics at the big ones, because it's like, they've got movie stars, they've got like manga people are there, comic book people are there. It's more of a production. The smaller conventions, because everybody knows each other, you can end up running into sort of social problems. I have not run afoul of any of this, but you learn like, oh, like this person took over a convention and they like, got rid of this guy. I'm like, but I like that guy, right? And like that stuff makes me uncomfortable. Like I just don't enjoy that element of fandom. So I just really would rather it be about books and stuff. And there's like more people, at the big conventions, so like you stand a better chance of getting your books out to people. That's nice. Diamond edition cover for book 2 reveal anytime soon. I'm excited to see it. Yes. I hoped it would have been out by now. We just need to sit down, my wife and I, and design the font layout. But Christmas being Christmas, it just hasn't been possible for us to have an evening in order to do stuff. It's been very, very hard to keep up at the moment. So we're going to do that very soon. We need to get the ebook out to everybody as well, the short story ebook. And then, sorry, I was reading a comment in my brain, short-circuited. But no, so we need to get the ebook out and like formally end the campaign. We got a couple like books that are still in transit because international shipping can get weird sometimes, and some like other little greebly things like that. But if we can just send we can just get the ebook sent out, that'll be the next thing. We can wrap up book 1. Pre-orders for book 2 will be probably in the back half of January. We want to get away from the holidays and spare everybody's bank accounts. And so we'll have it ready in time for that. But I want to make sure that we can do a big announcement about the date and reveal the cover at the same time. So it'll be soon, but I can't tell you exactly when yet, because my poor wife, who's my graphic designer, hasn't had a chance to sit down because we've been wrapping presents and the baby's been sick, and it's just, it's hard. This is the thing about going to Dragonsteel. That guy has like 60 employees and I have 0. So I have my wife when she feels like it. So it's been tough. It's a bit of a difference there. But it's cool. It's cool to see what we're aiming at. So sort of concretizes the goal. But we'll know soon. So do I have a particular number of words I aim for each day? Between 1 and 2,000. Yeah. I got 3 questions. Okay. What's up, man? Practical one first. I'm in the middle of plotting an epic fantasy book. Do I have any advice for keeping track of an expansive cast? You can make a separate document. Spreadsheet might honestly be helpful if you're worried about like little details like physical features. This is something I kind of wish that I had done, and when I start the next thing, I will probably be more thorough about. I could see a spreadsheet being useful. Eye color, hair color, place of birth, birthday, age, all of that stuff. To the extent that it's useful, you don't always need that information, but if you mention it, you could fill it in as you go. A lot of little world building details are not important until they are. And so, filling in things as you go is usually helpful. I have 2 monitors, which was like a huge game changer for me. That was huge. So am I still signing books from Quail Ridge? 100%. Yes, you can absolutely purchase. Speaking of, Disquiet Gods is out in paperback. today. So if you would like to purchase a signed copy of that or of any of my books in any of the editions that Coiler's book sells, which I think is just the US editions, they used to be able to get UK imports. I don't know if that's still true. You could order signed copies from them. Just there's a comment section during checkout. Just say, hey, I want Christopher to sign my book, and I would like him to say to Albert, right? Trying to cut back on the personalizations. When we do the book 7 release, I probably won't be able to write phrases and things. I could probably just do names because there were a lot for book 6, and it was very, very hard to get through them all in a reasonable amount of time. But yes, is the short answer. Titan says, is Dregs unavailable or is it just my country? It's just your country. I don't know what the reason would be precisely. If you're having problems, you want to send us an email at webmaster@solidempire.com. We might be able to work something out for you. Samwise says, we'll be in and out tonight. Wanted to say thanks for the books and Merry Christmas. Well, Merry Christmas to you too. How many nights would it have taken to beat a single Skahari warrior if the Seals invaded during the Middle Ages? I don't know. If it's the right knight, 1-to-1, right, is probably reasonable. But, practically speaking, we're talking about, no Nahute, right? Just sort of sword. I'd say 2 or 3-to-1, probably fair. 2 if they're, strategically good. So, Disquiet Gods is one of my favorite books this year. Well, thank you so much, and really of all time, second only to Earth and New Sun. I love Earth of the New Sun, so I will happily be number 2 in that situation. Wait, book 7 drops in 2025, tail end of 2025. Don't know which month yet. Somewhere between October and December. We'll have a date probably for you pretty soon. Do I have a method to determine how many words you think should be your book should be ahead of time? Yeah, but I'm bad at it, as you may have noticed. So I used to have an approximate sense of how long my chapters are. Book 1, book 2, I think the average is somewhere around 3,500 words. And so if I know, looking at my outline, how many chapters I have, I can estimate the total word count. And so you can, if you know that too, you can work this backwards algebraically, right? And you say, hey, I want to hit a target word count length of, my original goal was like 250,000 words for each book, right? After the first book came in at 238. I was like, well, 250 seems like a reasonable situation, right? The problem is my average chapter length got bigger. So as I outlined, assuming the same approximate number of chapters would work for the next book, I found that the books got longer, and this happened with Demon in White, and this really happened with the original version of Kingdoms of Death, which was also Ashes of Man, right? That was originally 320,000 words. And so was Disquiet Gods in its first draft. It was about 320,000 words. And so my average chapter length has crept up, and so I tried to back the number of chapters down in book 7, but book 7 did not let me. I had like this whole thing that got worked in. We've been jokingly calling the Godothan knot over on Patreon in my writing updates that sort of ended up adding another 15 chapters back into the book. So it now has the most chapters of any of the books in the series, but only by 2. It has 2 more chapters right now. In its outline is 89 chapters. And Demon in White has, I think, 87. But the chapters averaging about a 5,000 word length. So the book is significantly longer, despite the fact that the outline is not longer. So when I talked about words needing to be cut out, this is the problem, is what's happening is that I'm getting interrupted more, just, by the baby, by phone calls, by emails, by people wondering when book 4 is going to be reprinted in hardcover. Just kidding. But by other things too, right? Doctor's appointments, whatever. And it's, taking me out of the scene, and when I get back into the scene, I'll repeat little details that I've already written, and that's happening more and more and more as I've had other stuff. My dad was a computer programmer, and he would joke that like the better you are at computer programming, the higher they'll promote you until you aren't doing any more computer programming. And this is true, it turns out, of like basically any job, including writing. And so as my in the last year, especially as I've been busier, right? I'm a father, right? But also as I've had more like writing adjacent stuff to do, managing the Diamond editions, right? Patreon stuff, dealing with all the special edition emails, all this stuff. That's all work, right? But it's all work that's in the way of like the main thing. And I actually am starting to wonder if this isn't like actually just George Martin's problem, especially because he's like not an outliner. So like it's even harder for him to sort of get back into where he's going, because Hollywood is not on the phone with me all the time asking me to develop other TV shows. So like I can only imagine that's so disruptive to one's focus. You know, been a long time, but like I have a bit more sympathy there than I did like 3 years ago. Turns out it's very easy to write a giant series when no one's paying attention. And so now people are paying attention. It's a little bit harder, but this has also caused my estimation powers to sort of falter. And so my new plan is to actually start outlining way fewer chapters than I think. Because the other thing too is I always end up with more chapters. I almost never have fewer chapters. I've never had fewer chapters. So, yeah. So I need to sort of underestimate things and then work back. Oh, I missed another super chat from Shazbot. Any chance of physical Tales of Thunder? 100% chance. It's just that won't happen until after book 7 at this point. There's just no way. Let's see. My favorite books of the series are 2 and 3. Those are very good choices. Magic systems is such a narrow matrix through which to view magic and fantasy in general. Yeah, well, it's the problem is it's it's an imposition, right? This happens in any sort of field of study, right, as it matures, and this is true of like fantasy and science fiction literature as well. Is people build a vocabulary to talk about the thing, and once you do that, you start to trap your thoughts into little boxes, and everything sort of gets sort of crystallized, and so people have a really hard time of not thinking that way, right? And like this is sort of a repeated theme with how I try to talk about these things. When people will start talking about like what genre your book is, like don't think about what genre your book is. Don't try to write a grimdark book. Write a book, and if other people call it grimdark, that's fine, right? Don't try and hit a target like that. Tell your story first. Figure out what it is as far as you need to in order to sell it to people. But all of that language is it gets in the way. It sort of will box your creativity along with everything else. So, this is true of the idea of magic systems. This is true of everything. And the thing about science fiction and fantasy literary criticism, and sort of the language, not literary criticism, but the language around science fiction and fantasy is it's all built by sort of random democratic processes. And so it's never as it's not as precise. There's no Carolus Linnaeus, right? Like figuring out how to do scientific names for animals and just saying this is how we're doing it now, right? It's like kind of chaotic, and people don't always mean the same thing, and it can get very confusing. And my advice is basically ignore all of that and worry about your story and don't think about this. Because when I was an editor and I would hear pitches for people, they would almost always start by like, and then I have this magic system that, right? And so you end up creating this very formulaic product because you're thinking, I have to hit all these beats. And this is very ironic, right? From a population of people who mostly derides the idea of a trope, right? Magic systems are themselves a trope. You do not need them, right? And so, you can think, you can think a different way. But I completely agree with you. Brendan, it's good to see you, man. I missed Corey's second question somewhere. Oh, it jumped. That's what happened. I missed a lot of questions. Sorry, everybody. Yeah, here we go. Back to Noah. For writers who are trying to break in and are ready to take the next step, do I recommend querying to get an agent, or do I recommend smaller presses for anthologies for experience with editors? It depends on what your goal is. If you want to get short stories out, then I would try to do, or you're trying to be an indie writer, then those anthologies are like super helpful, because the small press might be a good compromise if you, you don't want to go full indie. Some of those small presses can be really great because they sort of have a mailing list, right? And they have something of a built-in audience a little bit, especially if they're very targeted, right? Now, I just sort of derided sort of very targeted thinking, right, in terms of craft, but in terms of business, right? Conversely, like buzzwords, keywords, and sort of this sort of crystal terminology is extremely useful because that's how algorithms think, right? And so if you have a small press, say, that's really, really good at military science fiction, right? And you wrote a military science fiction story, maybe it's to your advantage to try and get in with them. And because they're a small press, right, they don't need the formal structure of agents and things like that. But if your goal is to be a traditionally published writer, you probably need to do the agent thing. And that can be rough. But it depends on, like, the question you should ask yourself is, what kind of career do I want? Right, that's the first question in writing. And the second question is, how do I want to get there? Because there are this is probably like a whole this is probably like a whole series of panel videos, right? Because we could talk about this stuff indefinitely. And the only wrong way is the way that does not make you successful, right? And there's a lot of them, it turns out. And so you need to figure out what you want. Like, I knew I wanted to be a traditionally published writer, because when I was a kid, and there were two options, which was do that or be independently published. Being independently published wasn't cool yet. It is cool now. It was super sneered at. And it still is by, like, this is the thing that I think a lot of, like, indie writers don't get. Like, most people, like, don't dignify indie publishing even still, right? Like, your, like, mom's friend, right, who doesn't, read, who may not read, right, or your dad's friend who doesn't read. Like, the question I always get when I tell people I'm a writer is like, oh, are you published? Like, yeah, of course. Like, that, like, how would I not be? If, like, I just told you it was my job, right? If I'm at, like, a party and people ask, they have no idea, right? That's always the next question. Most people have, like, they don't, what they mean is, like, are you, like, a for real author, right? Or did you just put it out on Amazon like my Meemaw did? And the answer is that, and I don't mean to denigrate indie publishing. Obviously, like, it's you'd be extremely successful, more successful than me, obviously, right? There are any number of writers for whom that's true, but there's this huge swath of readers and potential readers who, like, only read a book if there's a TV show. And the shortest path to getting close to that outmost cloud of potential readers, I think personally, is through traditional publishing, which is why I wanted to do it. Because, like, I wanted the book to be in stores, so a random person who was Christmas shopping might have a chance of seeing it. That was my goal. So you just need to ask yourself, like, what do you want, right? Because if what you want is to, like, make enough money to, like, cover your mortgage, right? Maybe not all your bills, but your mortgage, right? Indie publishing is, like, 100% on the table, and, like, that's, like, very achievable, actually, right? It's not necessarily easy, like, it's still hard work, but like that's totally a cool path. And if you want to do that, then questions like anthologies and stuff are reasonable. Think about short stories. Is that you should really think about those small press anthologies and anthologies generally as networking opportunities. Really, why you do them is to meet other writers and editors who will ask you to do more of them and who might say, hey, I'm working with this new company. You should send us a book or something. It's not to be successful writing short stories. Unfortunately, it's 2024, not 1924. But if your goal, again, is to be a traditionally published writer, then the agent thing is really your only choice. That was a very, like, long answer. I hope that was helpful and not too rambling. And I hope I don't mean to denigrate indie publishing at all. I have nothing but respect for indie writers. It's a really tough business, and I mean, so is traditional publishing, but it's a different business. It is hard. So, and unlike all of people like Ryan Cahill and Philip Quaintrell, who do, like, all of this marketing craziness on top of everything else, which, I mean, like, I've done a fair bit too, but, like, man, Ryan really, like, I was so, like, when the first couple of days, first day I was hanging out with him, I was like, this dude's on his phone all the time. Like, what a millennial. And he, like, literally was just posting social media updates about the tour constantly. Right? Like, that is not me. You will notice I did not post a single picture from Dragonsteel because it never occurred to me to take a picture. So, yeah. Anyway, just started Demon in White. What, if anything, would the Hadrian that is writing his memoir say to the Had that it was the beginning of Empire of Silence? Man, I don't know. I don't know that he'd have anything to say to that kid anymore. Or conversely, maybe he would have, like, everything he's written to say, right? He is not super proud of himself at basically any stage in his life. So I don't know. I could see it going either way. Okay, here's Corey's second question. Why does it seem that tragedies with sad or at least bittersweet endings seem to stick harder and have more staying power. Yes, I'm heard over season 2 of Arcane. I don't know. I think part of the problem, right? This is maybe too deep an answer, so maybe this is wrong, or maybe this is pretentious. The problem with the technical distinction between comedy and tragedy in Elizabethan theater, at the very least, is usually that comedy ends with a wedding, right, and tragedy ends with a death, in some way, right? And the problem with, we talk all the time, right? The part of the art in telling a story is knowing where to end it, and the reality is that, at least insofar as everybody dies, with a couple exceptions, every life is a tragedy, right? And we know that. There's that the de Beauvoir quote that Tolkien references in that one clip that everybody sees on Instagram Reels, right? Where he says that, like, for where de Beauvoir says that, like for every man his own death is like is unnatural, right? It's an imposition, right? And that's true for all of us, right? I had a very close family friend pass away yesterday, and and he was very old. He was in his 90s, right? So it's he lived a really great life, right? And in a certain sense, it's a joyous occasion, right? But it is the tragedy, even in that best case scenario, right? He lived this long, very wonderful, a very wonderful life. He changed the lives of a lot of people, right? And for the better. Even then, the tragedy is for the people you leave behind, right? And so our life in this world is fundamentally tragic, and I think that the tragedy as an art form speaks to that truth that we, especially in our modern culture, try really hard not to look at, right? We are constantly looking at screens and reading stories and listening to music and doing everything we can, right, to not be alone with the silence, right? And so we hide from this fact all the time, but we're all gonna die, and that's just inescapable. So I think the tragedy speaks. I think it's more true because it speaks to this. That is my theory. But then again, I am a guy who has a tiny skull over his head right here. So I don't know. Yeah. That's my best guess. But I agree with you. The thing about comedy, right, is that the story is not over, actually, right? There's more life after the wedding at the end of a Midsummer Night's Dream, right? It's only a dream from one night, right? It's not quite, but you know what I mean, right? It's just a little phase of their lives. Their characters are going to move on. Whereas, after Hamlet's dead, Hamlet's story is over. So, as everyone's must be. Anyway, I could probably edit that answer down. See, this is what I'm talking about. Sensei Muad'Dib says, I'm a huge fan. I've got several doctors. I was sailing to read your books. Well, thank you for that. And even a random person while I was in the Strand in New York City. Really appreciate that. That's a cool store. That's a really cool store. Let's see. Okay, catching up now. My buddy and I are at the last boss of Shadow the Erd Tree. What Catholic saint should we ask for intercession? George, obviously. You're going to battle. Look. They nerfed Radon. Okay, you'll be fine. You'll be fine. I've beaten Radon pre-nerf twice now, in both of his incarnations. So I don't want to hear it. You'll be okay. Also, haven't you beaten him already? I'm sure we've talked about this. Was there ever a book or author you discovered purely because the cover art jumped out at you? That's a good question. Yes, Garth Nix, Sabriel. I can't remember who did the covers for those, the Old Kingdom books, but it's the black cover with Sabriel in the blue surcoat, the very painterly image. I bought that at the book fair in middle school. Sabriel, that was one of my I'm done with Harry Potter. I need to move on. No, those books are great. In a lot of ways, I like those Old Kingdom books. I liked those Old Kingdom books more than Harry Potter when they were both sort of a thing. Yeah. Yeah. What are my thoughts on literary comprehension and its impact on one's ability to appreciate experience a book? For example, how you experience the Lord of the Rings age 12 versus 30. I mean, like, there's the Heraclitus line about how you can't step in the same river twice, right? And that's true of books, right? Because you're a different person at different times. And part of that's just because you're better educated. Part of that's because your brain is like developed, right? Part of that's because you have more context, so you can see more things. Or, right, especially if you do what I do, which is like reread the same books incessantly. You're so familiar with so much of the book already that you don't see most of it anymore, and what you see are things you didn't notice before. And rereading is a very different exercise than reading for all of those reasons, right? Because you're competing with images, not just with the text, but with the image of the text that you have, and that helps you can sort of triangulate your own perspective over time by using the book as sort of like a pole star, right? And you come back to it. This is partly uh one of the utilities as a religious person in like looking at scripture, right? Because it doesn't move, right? And you do, right? And if you sort of measure your life against this sort of measuring stick, right, then you can see yourself, right, in sort of different places, and that's very useful. But that's like the fact that you change, right, is a consequence of all sorts of experiences. And I read Lord of the Rings incessantly, right, and it's a different book every time, but that's because I'm a different person, right? You're never the same person, actually. And so yeah. Um let's see. Definitely too late to answer that question. Wait, maybe not. My wife sent me a question. Hang on. Okay. I need Christopher's speeches in short video format. Yeah, I one thing I would love to do is like clip these streams out and make more shorts. But who has the time? Um, Albert with the question: do I know when the Disquiet Gods reprint is happening? Do you mean the hardcovers or the paperbacks? The paperbacks are out today, my friend. Hardcovers are next year. Oh, hardcover, yeah, next comment. Hardcover is next year. I do not know when 4, 5, and 6 are being reprinted. My understanding is that they will be out before book 7, but I do not know more specifically than that. Dawn and I have not talked about that yet. Oh, hey, Elise. Back to Diamond Edition. I love it. Any idea when the Howling Dark Edition will be available for sale? Probably will go up for pre-order late January. We're just gonna let the holidays happen, and I need to finish a couple other things. We need to get the cover design. I need to get a little video ready for it and get Steve back on the channel here soon. Because we'll be selling them through Steve's website, which also needs to get finished. Steve's had a pretty rough year, just jobs and things, and so things got a little bit slowed down. In addition to the campaign getting slowed down, but most of the kinks should be worked out of the system now, so things should be faster. But I also need to finish editing Howling Dark, and that's not happening until book 7 is done. I'm doing nothing except finishing book 7. It needs to go. Yeah. So, but the pre-order should go up probably late January or early February. Do I have a certain schedule for my day as I write? Sorry for all the writing questions. You don't have to apologize at all. Yeah, no, I get up early. I try to. Today my alarm either did not go off or I did not hear it. I try to get up at like 5 and work from there and do my writing first so that I can do everything else later. But yeah. With series wrapped up, do I think Sun Eater is going to be what defines your career? You've got another 50, 60 years of writing left, and you, God willing. Man, 60 would be super cool. 90 would be an awesome score. It's an A. It would be an awesome score to get. What would I like to be known for? I don't know yet, right? Like, I mean, the reality is it depends on how to your question is like it depends on what you mean, right? Sun Eater has already defined my career, right? In that it has literally shaped it, right? It is, but it hasn't defined it, right? In the sense that like defined as de fine, right? Like it's not over, right? But it is set the trajectory, it has set the tone, right? And it has set the bar in a certain sense. I need to not do worse, right? But as far as like what the thing is, like I have no idea, right? Like maybe the next thing that I do will be bigger in some way, right? And people like Sunny was really good, but like actually this like trilogy thing, like that's whatever it is, right? Whether that's Barrel King related or not, right? That's the thing that like I got your mom's friends to that like that's what finally made it to where nobody mispronounces my name anymore, right? Who knows? Who knows, right? Like, Dave Butler was saying this to me once. He was like, this is your journeyman piece, actually, right? Like, you've got a long ways to go, right? Not pejoratively, right? It's just like I have time, and like this, in a certain sense, is only Act One. And I'd like to come back to it at some point too. Come back to the universe. Come back to some of these characters, but for a while it'll be other things. And who knows? Who knows what'll happen? But what I want to be known for. I want to be known. This is like a very sentimental answer. I want to be known for my kids, right? And for the sake of my, people who know me, right? I want to be known, right? I want to be a good dad, right? That's what I want to be known for, and that's what really matters. So, but no, if I write some books people like, that's cool too. But the real measurable effect will be, in the lives of the people that are close to me, and that matters more. So, we'll get back to the hard magic. Let's go. As a scientist, I thought I wanted hard magic, but I found it detracted from the story when they went into great detail to explain why things work the way it did. Yeah, it does, right? For the same reason that any info dump will do that, right? Stories are about people; they're not about ideas. Right? If they're about ideas, they have to be about ideas through people, right? What's appealing about, I will weirdly be positive about Ridley Scott for a moment because this is the example I went to. What's appealing about the duelists, right, is not the struggle of like Bonapartism versus republicanism or sort of the old France, right? It's the two guys, right, and like their story, right? You don't care about ideas really. This is why I like the whole personal political division is silly, right? What you care about is human beings, right? And if you don't care about human beings, like you need to rethink yourself, right? Well, you care. People always say like, oh, like I really like I like stories that are character driven. Like all stories are character driven, right? It's just a question of how well, because it's about people, right? And so, if you stop to sort of have your story driven by the magic system, right? It is then as much driven. It's like a story that would be driven by Sumerian grammar, right? Or thermodynamics, right? And that's not the story. Those are forces impacting the characters. The story is what they do with those impacts. And the thing about sort of fairy tale logic, right, and magic in fairy tales is that the sort of rationale behind how the magic functions in the story is about character, and it's about theme, and it's about the relationship between the characters and the world, right? You have a fairy tale where it's like, example I think Nicholas gave was like, if this candle gets blown out, the princess will die, right? Now, how does that work energetically? Like, does it matter? It doesn't, right? Because you can understand the symbolic association between those two things. So if this happens, then this happens, right? And that makes sense to the wizard, right? And it kind of makes sense to you hearing it. And so, because there's sort of symbolic logic to how fairy tale magic works, even if the like scientific connections between A and B aren't there. And this is a very alien way, I think, for most of us to think. It's certainly hard for me to think in this way. But the cool thing is then that, like, ideally in a fantasy story, the magic should function on the level of meaning, right? Of the meaning of the story itself, right? Because when, I've talked about this before, right? Dragons exist, right? Psychologically, right? Because the forces, right, that you are responding to, right, in Predator, right, like tigers, like if you're a human being in your natural environment, tigers, fire, birds, snakes, like that's a dragon, right? Your brain is responding to dragon. That's like literally real, right? As far as your brain is concerned, it's just abstracted across a lot of like actual things because you don't know what you're looking at in the dark, right? So in a story, fantasy makes all those sort of symbolic realities concrete, right, on the page in the world for the characters. And then magic, right, is operating on this like higher level, like it's operating on the meaning of the story itself. And so the wizard has the ability to affect the meaning of the story through magic. That is sort of like this rough theory that I'm sort of trying to find a way to articulate. And I think the only way I will ultimately be able to articulate it is by telling a story. So, watch this space, I guess, one of these days. Now for an easy question, if Krim were Freaky Friday'd into the cantina in Han's place opposite Greta, would he also shoot first? No, he would throw a knife. But yes. Who would be my ideal director for an adaptation of Sun Eater? Mamoru Oshii, circa 1995. Vishrud, welcome back. I just read Blood and Fire, and I remember you mentioning you were reading the series as well. How far are you? Book 7 basically ate my entire life, which I hope Ryan will forgive me for. And so I have like not advanced at all. I need to read it. I owe Ryan a blurb, and vice versa. We made a pact, but book 7 has basically prevented me from reading anything. There are a couple other blurbs I owed. I meant to read. It's one indie book on the flight, and I just didn't do it because I was just so exhausted. Yeah. Do I do any revisions before sending the manuscript to my editor? Usually no. Or if I do, it's very, very like superficial stuff. To do on a scale from 1 to 10, how mentally ill is Severian? I less than I think his critics would say, but definitely not 0. Maybe a 4. Maybe a 4. He's not a good person, but I don't think that's because he's insane. Yeah, so we talked about this a little bit. I get up really early. I get up, well, I say really early, Casey's here. I think he gets up at like 3 a.m. I get up at like 5, and then it will probably take me an hour to get going. But between 6 and 6:30, I'll start writing, and I will write usually about 3 hours until my daughter wakes up. And then I will take a break, and then I will get back to it, and then we'll sort of see how it goes. But the bulk of the writing is going to occur in those first 3 hours, and then like all of the non-writing stuff happens later. So that's sort of the basic thing. Who are some of my favorite and most inspirational books and authors? You were one of my favorite writers ever. So confining myself to science fiction and fantasy for a moment. Tolkien's number 1, which is a cliche answer, but it is true. Lord of the Rings is my favorite book. I don't care that it's a cliched answer. It is still the greatest fantasy novel. I don't think there's close competition, frankly. Gene Wolfe, Frank Herbert's, those are sort of like the big obvious influences. Dan Simmons to an extent as well. Lois McBaster Bujold is great. I really love the Borkowskian books a lot. They're super fun. I read a lot of like older science fiction writers, like I was talking about earlier, like during high school. C.L. Moore, Lee Brackett, Van Vogt, Paul Anderson, writers that like most readers my age don't talk about anymore. There's a lot of science fiction writers who like just didn't get passed on the way that Asimov did for one reason or another. Their agents weren't as good or as motivated, let's say. But like as far as like classics go, so I have like a Greek literature background. My favorite of the playwrights is Aeschylus, talking about tragedies. The comedies are not nearly as good and have not aged as well. This is another interesting thing to Corey's question from like earlier, right, is that comedy is also like super culturally specific in a way the tragedy isn't, because we all kind of suffer the same. It doesn't matter if you're, European or American or, East Asian or Indian or African. Like, if I punch you, like, you will hurt, right? If your mother dies, unless you have a complicated relationship, you'll be sad, right? If someone you care about dies, you will be sad, right? Pain is universal, in a way that humor, for example, is not. Now, not all comedy is funny, right? But like, the sort of sitcom, Greek sitcoms like Menander, like his stuff, that stuff is not aged well, man. But the tragedies have, and Aeschylus is my favorite. Sophocles is probably the better writer, but I love Aeschylus. I the Shakespeare, one ought not to try to escape Shakespeare. Milton to an extent. I love Keats, Eliot. Speaking of poets for a moment, but a lot of cliche answers, but that's because they deserve to be. Yeah. What is the average standard of living for Solon plebeian? I imagine like either 80s, 90s. Assuming they make it that far, they're not in military service or something. Yeah, 80s, 90s is like very normal. Solon plebeians are essentially you and me. We're all plebes by sort of imperial genetic standards. So it's about about 80s, 90s, a little bit more than 70. GoldenEye, yes. Casino Royale, yes. Excellent choices. Is there a possibility of future series revolving around the early stages of the Mercani? Probably not. That is probably not a story that I will tell, because I don't like prequels. I think that prequels, mostly what prequels do is they take a bunch of really cool sort of vague suggestions from an earlier work, and they give you answers that are less cool than all the questions and thoughts that you have about them. So I don't know that I want to do that. But I also don't want to do it because it's like very close to our time, and I don't want to be seen as doing a story that is topical, in a current eventsy kind of way. So I think it is better left where it is. I think it's more effective in the way that it is right now. That's not to say I won't write stuff that's earlier in the timeline, but like a big series, probably not. Have I read Gene Wolfe's Long Sun series? What I think of it? Yes, I have. It is great. I think anybody who is put off by Severian might try Long Sun instead, because Silk is quite awesome, quite wonderful. I don't think I understand Long Sun as fully as I understand New Sun. I haven't spent as much time on it. I read it twice, and I love it. I usually recommend it for people who really want to see a masterclass in dialogue. The way that Gene handles dialogue in those books is just so astonishing. Everybody has such a distinctive voice. They have these like little ticks and stuff. You could take all the speech tags out of that book, out of those books, and you'd still know exactly who said everything. And they're just super fun. The story is a lot smaller, superficially. I think it's a lot easier to get into those books, but it's probably harder to fully understand them. Is sort of the feeling that I have. That may not be true, but there's a lot going on that's sort of way under the surface in those books that I really, really love. Do I know when the cover refresh of Lesser Devil will come out? No, that is like way down the list at the moment. John Ballaran, who is doing the art for those novellas, is working on the art for Howling Dark, and we're not quite there yet. I couldn't begin to speculate when it'll happen. I hope next year, but we got to do the Diamond Edition stuff first. It's just poor John has cataracts, and he's moving slow. But he, wants to keep working, and want to help him do that. So, so we're moving as fast as we can, though. Do I want to ask a super heavy question? But do I struggle with imposter syndrome or bad mental health? And if so, how do I deal with it? You seem like a lovely man. Well, thank you. So I imposter syndrome, no. Frankly, that's I don't know how to answer this without sounding like a jerk. But that has never been an issue for me, because like I'm actually like a very difficult sort of like road through publishing. I've had a lot of trouble with publishers and sort of other institutions in publishing. I've had to fight really hard to stay where I'm at and to get the series to come out and to take care of my readers appropriately, and sort of to defend my work from sort of moneyed interference, right? Which is normal, right? Like, I'm not begrudging the system for being the system, but like I had to fight really hard to like make things work, and they've worked. And so because I think I had to fight so hard, like I feel perfectly justified. Uh, you know, all things considered. I do sometimes feel like the books aren't good enough. I could all that you always see what you could have done better, right, with your own work, and that's true of sort of anything. But I'm not really oppressed by those thoughts or anything. It's a call to just keep doing better. And like one thing is, I won't name names, but like I know a lot of writers who get really big and they get complacent, and no one's willing to tell them no anymore or edit them. And I really, really don't want to be those guys. Like I want more, careful exam. I want the books to be more polished, and I don't want to like fall into this trap of thinking I'm right all the time. And I really like, yeah, no. So no, but like mental health generally, like I'm chemically depressed like all the time, actually. And so I'm kind of used to it. But it's really hard to be like saying it all the time when you have like a 18-month-old running around and like learning about words and being excited about garbage cans. It's like impossible to actually be sad, right? Like people are very down in our culture on the idea of having children, and it's just literally been the best things ever happened to me. It's so cool. So it's very hard for me to be depressed, like seriously. But like work is very hard. There's a lot to do. And I want people to be happy. It's really depressing when people aren't happy with something. Either they don't like the book, or they don't like the answer to a question, or they aren't satisfied with a product, or they have some other issue. I don't like it when people think that like something in the book means that I hate them, for example, like personally or for political reasons. That's always very painful. I don't want anyone to feel badly. I don't want people to have a bad experience either with the books or with me, right? And so when they do, I feel terrible. That's hard, right? Um, but um, but imposter syndrome, no, right? I feel a lot of pressure to be perfect, but I don't think that's a bad thing. So, what is after Sun Eater? Is your head there yet? I don't 100% know. We don't have a contract or anything yet. I have plenty of ideas. But I did write a fantasy story called The Barrow King. You could see on galaxysf.com. And just look up The Barrow King and my name, and you can read that. And that may be the next thing. Strength or dexterity in Dark Souls. Quality build, my guy. In the first game, quality build. It just depends on the game. You can get away with. I think Dex is better in Dark Souls 2. I don't have a strong opinion on 3. 3 is the one I've played the least. I played 3 once, and I haven't even done the DLC. It came out at a time of my life when I like didn't have time, so I like beat the game once, and I just sort of moved on. Which is a shame because Ring City looks awesome, and I need to actually play it eventually. But yeah. Is there a character in Sun Eater I'd like to write more about? There are plenty. There are plenty. The Emperor, for example, is pretty high up the list. I wish Corvo had more time in the series. I love her very much. If this is a setup question, hate me to say, Aliva will be back around in some form at some point in the future. I just don't know when. Yeah. Will I change the rules of translation in future Sun Eater universe books like I did in the first letter of Imra? Yeah, 100%. I'm glad you noticed that. That was the thing that was so fun about that, and you're the first person who's mentioned it to me. And so that is very, I'm glad that worked out. Yes, no, I would like to do that because almost none of the terminology in the first letter of Imra aligns with what Hadrian uses, and that's like super deliberate. No, I will continue to do that for sure. For sure. You've mentioned before that writers can write well about things they've not experienced. Are there any topics you believe you have to have experience to fully explore and or appreciate? Um, uh, I don't know that like an experience is mandatory for you to fully explore or appreciate, right? Because the thing is, right? So like let's talk about violence, for example, right? I blessedly have had very very little violence in my life. That being said, you know, outside of like sport competition, right? Like I've done boxing. I've been hit in the face plenty, but like real serious violence. If you can, the thing is it's not really on the writer, right, to get everything right, right? It's on the writer to get everything right enough that it interfaces with the experiences of the reader in a meaningful way. And so I've had readers who are I've had readers who are in the military, right? I just talked earlier, like Brandon's bodyguard, right? Like was in the military, right? And I've had other readers like who are in the military. I have my friend, I have a friend uh, who told me that I got a lot of stuff right, right? But like the way that you do it, right, is by knowing enough that when you get to someone who knows more than you, right, in your reader, when you have a reader who knows something more about an experience than you do, you haven't said anything that's untrue to their experience, right? And now it's not going to work 100% of the time. There's going to be somebody who has a very strong feeling in an opposite direction, right? But if you write enough about war, for example, in a way that someone who's really been there recognizes the effort and can see the truth in what you're talking about, right? Then their brain will take them the rest of the way, right? They'll do that themselves. Really, most of the story is in your head. It's not on my page, right? The author isn't dead, right? But the reader is the one who's alive in the room, right? Um, you know, the text is a tool for your mind to experience the story, right? It's not the story in itself. You know, you look about like little physical details and description, right? If I describe a uniform, you're probably imagining more details than is in my description, right? I might not describe the pick stitching, right? Or like the texture of the fabric. I might miss a detail that your brain will fill in. This is true of like bigger things, like violence, right? Like suffering, like an expertise in rocketry, right? And the technique in writing is learning to say just enough, right, to let the reader work, right? And so I don't think that you as the writer need necessarily to experience any particular thing, as long as you are sufficiently empathetic, right, about whatever the particular thing is, right? Now, with subject matter expertise, things like I am not a physicist, right? You know, you might have to do some research, right? But a lot of like emotional experience and sort of suffering, those questions, writing is an exercise in empathy, and it's just a question of having that empathy, I think, and being sensitive to the fact that it may be a story for you, but certain things that you say may not have been for the person reading that, and that doesn't mean that you shouldn't go there, or that you should pull your punches, right? Um, but it does mean that you should, like, in telling the story, try to be in the head of not the reader, but in the head of the character, right? And if you're true to the character, readers will see that, right? And I think that'll be okay. So no, I don't think you need necessarily experience any particular thing. So, have I watched Arcane? I have not. I have not. What are my favorite 80s sci-fi movies? Uh, I mean, Empire Strikes Back, obviously, Blade Runner, like the big obvious ones. I really enjoy Ice Pirates, which is an extremely dopey, stupid movie. It's like not aged well at all. But it's got a young Ron Perlman in it. It's got Angelica Houston in it. And it's 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 got a, like a sort of a Guardians of the Galaxy parody thing going on. I think it's just very it is not aged well, but it is very funny. Um, my dad showed that movie to me when I was a kid. Super not an appropriate movie, but it's pretty funny. Um, I'm blanking for some reason. I'm thinking a lot of fantasy movies. I love Highlander. I love Beastmaster, but those are fantasy films. I also like not sure about years in a lot of cases, but anyway, I've admitted to liking Ice Pirates, so we're all good for now. I should come to England. It's always raining there. I would love to come to England. I just don't have a plan at the moment. Am I planning to come? Am I coming to Colorado? Not as of now, but that would be cool. I've never been to Colorado. One day. So you say your contrarian take to mine is that 100 times the ire anyone directs at hard magic should be directed at lit RPG and anything related. The thing is that hard magic is like just one step nearer, right, than lit RPG. The logic is basically the same. I think the basic premise, right, is either this sort of deeper Newtonian sense that magic must have an energy cost, right? But I think the idea that magic must have an energy cost is itself an invasive weed from game mechanics. I think we have the sense that because you have mana points in a game, that's what gives the wizard limitations in the game from the perspective of a game, right? That we must do that in literature. But like books are not games, are not movies, are not comic books, are not, right? And we have this tendency, because we like games, I like games, right, to pull ideas from the game world into literature, and that I don't think appropriate. Yeah, so I think these are related issues, but I share your dislike of lit RPG, and I do think, broadly speaking, that it is worse news for literature generally. It's not to say there isn't a good version. Look, I love .hack, right? But it's that's like the one thing, right? But I do not want to read a book about stats. Jackson, I'm glad you liked the book. Being a Dragonsteel with all the book 5 hype was my curiosity peaked to read Stormlight eventually. Not particularly. I have nothing against them, right? It's just that like I increasingly feel like reading like these other major touchstones is like probably not something that I want to do, right? Especially especially like big ongoing things. Like I think it's very important that I do my own thing from here on, especially because like the bulk of the criticism I've received is like being too close to the things that like made me want to be a writer in the first place. Like I think that I need to be the move is to be more myself, and I think the stuff that I need to read moving forward is not these sort of big benchmark things that everybody else is reading. I need to not do that anymore. And so I don't have any plans to read Stormlight in the future, or anything really. If it happens, it happens. But it's not like on my to-do list. I will be reading all the Guy Gavriel case stuff I'm short on because I love him so much. But yeah. It's nice of you to say that, Clayton. I say a lot. And sort of repeat myself. But that is very kind of you to say. Jeffrey, does the Diamond Edition come with rights if I'm buying a copy from the secondary market? That depends on the seller, and you should work that out with the seller. We have like no way to verify that a sale has taken place, right? So if you say, "Hey, I bought this copy," right? You could send me a screenshot of the book, but like for all I know, it was AI at this point, right? So like I need to hear from the seller, right, and from you, like, hey, this transaction took place. Otherwise, we like can't verify it. And so this is like very tricky, and it's a kind of a huge headache, frankly. So if you can get the seller to verify that that is the case, and reach out to us. Otherwise, like we have no way to know for sure. So just clarify with the person you're buying it from. How long do we spend the outline versus actually writing the book? The outline, depending on the book, might take a month to 2 months, and then the writing might take between on the low end 6, and on the high end, I'm closing in on a year at this point. Actually, I'm over a year on book 7. Book 7 has been very, very protracted. It's been very difficult. But sort of in a different way than, like, Disquiet Gods was acutely difficult. Chapter 40 was like 2 months. This one has just been a slow march, just all the way through. Do I ever do events in or near Raleigh? I live in Raleigh. Yeah, 100%. All my launch signings are at Quailer's Books in North Hills, which we're now calling Midtown, which, as someone who was born here, I hate. There is no Midtown, but it's in North Hills. So I do all my launch events there. I will be in Cary at the Barnes & Noble on January 29th for their book club, but that's what I got at the moment. But yeah, 100%. 100%. Let's see. Any chance of a TV show in the near future? In the near future, no chance. But maybe something could happen. Next time in Utah, I should go to Arches. I would love to go to Arches. I've not had a chance. I've been down that way. I drove through St. George, and that's such a cool part of the world, man. But I need to actually have time to do stuff. Hello, Lorinda. Nice to see you here. Just came to tell you thank you so much for taking time to come to Nexus to sign a book. I've started 5 more other people reading Sign You. Well, thank you so much. It was nice to meet you. When I have my own bodyguard, will they have to be a Stormlight fan? That would be pretty awesome, actually. Thoughts on Chronicles of Thomas Covenant by Stephen Donaldson. So I started to read that, I think, too young. I read the first one in 9th grade, and I really, really struggled with the content. Really struggled with the content. And I never continued because it was just too, let's just say it was just too adult for me at the time, and I have not circled back. I don't know what I was expecting at the time, but it was not that. It was a little bit of a tough read for me. But I was too young to really have a serious opinion of it, and I just haven't had a chance to give it another try. Do the salesmen have any marriage rights? Hyde asks. The answer is or is it sort of a grab them right off the streets kind of thing? The answer to both of those questions is yes. Yes. Maybe we'll get a better look at that sort of stuff at some point, but you'll see. We'll see. How was Dragon Seal Nexus? It was great. Very successful show from a me standpoint. I met a lot of people. A bunch of booktubers were there, which was awesome. Way more than I was expecting. I got to meet Daniel Green. I got to meet Patrick Leo. But I also got to meet Jake Bishop and Bangs Khan and the Tudor Ramble guys and a couple other people. KC. I finally got to meet KC in person. I can't believe that I didn't mention that. It was finally good to see him. So that was fun. And I got a bunch of friends out there. DJ Butler, Larry Correa, Steve Diamond. I got to meet the guy who did the printing on the Diamond edition, so that was fun. And that was really cool. And I did meet the man himself for about 30 seconds, which was awesome. Which was really cool. So how do you come up with names for places? I'm really bad at it. Okay. So it depends on what you're doing, right? Because how you name a place as a writer depends on what kind of story you're telling and what kind of world you're building. You think about how we name things in real life, right? Now, planets are pretty easy, right? We tend to name them after gods and mythological figures, or we name them after discoverers and stuff. If you look at a map of Earth, right, all the stuff that was discovered most recently, right, landforms, say in Antarctica, for example, right, are named very unromantically, right? It's Victoria Land or something like that, right? They're named in honor of whoever the monarch of the people doing the discovering was. You got Queen Maud Land or something like that. It's not very cool, right? But we name planets after gods. And so for me, naming planets in Sun Eater, usually what I do is take place names from the ancient world, circa the first couple of centuries, right? And I have a map, and I sort of scroll around and look at things. But if you're building a medieval kingdom, one thing that might behoove you, right, is to think about the relationship between places, right? How do the rivers and the forests and the cities relate to each other geographically, right? Because names belong culturally, right? This is something that's like increasingly hard to see in the modern world because everybody moves around, especially in America, right? Nobody's from anywhere, right? We're just from everywhere, and so it's like not weird in an American city for there to be a Hindu temple next to an Episcopalian church, right? But in a medieval kingdom, that's weird, right? If you're building an island kingdom, right, then that like basically there's been no cross migration to or from in a few hundred years, right? Like the name should belong, right? And so the names of the landscape, right, river, mountain, probably inform the name of the human settlements, right, and not the other way around, right? Unless what you have is some sort of like invasive, imperial or colonial thing. You can also give things multiple names, because people do that, right? If your country gets conquered by the French, they might change some names, and so like you look at England, for example, very often there will be a Celtic name, an Anglo-Saxon name, and a French name for and you can work on things like that. But you need to consider the interrelationships between the cultures that you're building and the landscape, and then the landscape informs the human geography to an extent, right? Natural barriers so your map will inform a lot of your world building. Consider, for example, that Egypt stops at the cataracts of the Nile, right? And above the cataracts, it's Sudan, right? That's a natural barrier that changes things, right? And so, it depends on how you build your map. So start with your map, right? And sort of work out from there, right? I hope that makes sense. There could probably be like a whole seminar on like online naming, but that's maybe some like good basic stuff. Do I think a 180, 200,000 word debut fantasy is considered too long and publishable by trad pub houses these days? Yes. Yeah. When they say that they're looking for 100 to 120,000 words, they totally mean it. And it is like not a joke. Empire of Silence was 120,000 words when it was The Murdered Son. It got longer after it got brought in and edited and all of that stuff, and that's okay. But then you should consider is that longer books have all sorts of financial risks associated with them, which means they will print more of them, which means your odds of getting a large rollout on your first printing are very low. This is a big part of what happened to me, because my book was so long, they didn't print a lot of them, which meant only a small number of readers really got print copies in that first year because they weren't printing anymore. And so that really kneecapped my growth. And so for strategic reasons, you might consider, if you have a 200,000 word book, maybe it's 2 books. That might be your easiest move. Is to try and figure out a way to break that up. And if that means you end up with 230,000 word books, you have to add stuff, that's cool. All right, because then you actually look awesome, right? You don't tell them about the second book when you sell the first one, but then when they're like, hey, do you have book 2 ready? You can go, bam, already there. And then you look like a pro. All right, so that might be what I would recommend if you've already got a 200,000 word book you're sitting on, you're trying to find agents for. Paper got very expensive after the plague, and it has not come all the way down like nothing has. I just spent $10 on 4 sticks of butter earlier. You might want to aim at shorter things, is what I'm trying to say, and then you can work up to bigger things later. Let's see, we got a super chat here. Long Sun Mel Rubies, welcome back. Saw your latest Patreon update. Losing your furnace sucks. Yes, not fun. It is all fixed though. Looking to hopping on to spread some Christmas cheer. Merry Christmas to you. And to ask why you to make your Sun Eater books so good. Because if I made them bad, I couldn't live with myself. That's why. But thanks, man. Merry Christmas to you too. And also I want to go back real quick to Titan's Vision. It is totally okay to be bad at names. You get better at it by practicing. That's an easy thing to practice and just sort of think about. You know, and it is like okay for some names to be goofy, right? Like that's fine too. So you don't have to commit. A name is a very easy thing to change. If it's bad now, it doesn't have to stay bad forever. Are we ever going to get a linguistic breakdown of various alien races? I'd love a Salesman list of idioms. Never say never, but I certainly don't have anything near professionally viable that I could show you. Can't wait for the people I got Empire of Silence for Christmas. I'm ready to watch Obsessions of the Fall. Well, that is very kind of you. I'm very honored to be part of anybody's Christmas gift giving. That is very, very cool. I hope everybody enjoys the books. Thank you. And Orion is here. Orion made it. Awesome. After I turn in book 7, will I celebrate in any way? Yes, but I don't know what that way will be. I've jokingly said that I will just go eat Japanese food at the expensive Japanese restaurant every day for a week, but I don't know if I will actually do that. We'll see. We'll see what's happening. So, but I'll do something. I'll need to take a break. Yeah. So, yeah. Is it hard to write real loss for characters like Hadrian? Smart guy, unique processes. Not really. Writing Hadrian's personality at this point is very sort of second nature. Yeah, no. The thing about writing anything serious, or we talked about this with like writing stuff that like maybe is traumatic that you don't have a personal experience with, like very few like truly traumatic things have ever happened to me, right? Personally, I joke with everybody. I'm basically Bilbo Baggins, right? Basically, dragon included. But you know, the thing about it is that you need to take everything seriously, right? If you're going to write something serious, you know, you can't cheap out on it. And that's really it. So that's true with like anybody writing loss. Like loss is serious, loss is painful, and that loss is something I do have a personal experience with. As pretty much all of us do, right? You know, so that one's easier, but you know, you just got to be careful. So and just take what you're doing seriously. I've said before, it's not hard for me to kill characters. I just want to make sure that I'm killing them in a way that is respectful of your attachment to those characters as readers, right? Let's see. I saw you were a Dragonsteel. Have I read any Brandon Sanderson books? And if so, which were your favorites? I have not. I read like a bit of Elantris when I was in college, and I did not finish it because a friend had given it to me. And I'm one of those people who's like super resentful of being handed books. I was just like, I didn't want to read this. This was on my to-do list. Why did you give me homework? And so I just never finished it. Which is fine. If I could choose someone from history to inspire a villain for a fantasy series, who would I choose? I mean, like, there's no shortage of people, right? You know, being a Roman guy, right? Diocletian would be really interesting. You know, that sort of tetrarchy period is super fascinating. And I would, I was reading a bit about that. I read about that on my flight instead of doing the blurb. I promised because I'm a bad person. So Diocletian would be really cool. You know, Julian the Apostate would be really cool too. Speaking about Roman history, because Julian is like actually like a super charismatic, kind of like fascinating character, right? And I think that would be neat. But I mean, there are so many, right? History is of inexhaustible depth. But those are maybe a couple like less obvious characters. I like your suggestion about Nimrod. I think that'd be cool. Sort of already done a little bit with Napoleon, but like Napoleon is himself an inexhaustible well. You know, so maybe some more Napoleon in the future would be cool. Yeah. Saladin. I don't know. No shortage of people. Yeah, those old Kingdom books are so good. Do I skip Tom Bombadil? Do you skip Tom Bombadil? I hope not. No one should ever skip Tom Bombadil unless we're skipping the Rings of Power. Like you can skip Rings of Power, but no, Tom Bombadil is awesome, and Tom Bombadil only gets better with repeat viewing. Tom Bombadil is great. Tom Bombadil is master. So no, no, Tom Bombadil is awesome. You can't skip the Old Forest. The Old Forest is so good. Also, if you skip Tom Bombadil completely, to skip Tom Bombadil completely, you must skip the Barrow Downs, and the Barrow Downs are amazing. No, no, do not skip Tom Bombadil. No. How do you rate a good and compelling villain? What is better, a villain with tragic past or pure evil? I mean, you know, those are not mutually exclusive, right? Like, having a tragic past does not justify your actions, right? That's the thing, right? That someone's sins are understandable, right, only means that they are human. Sin is like super easy to understand, actually, right? You do something because it's convenient or because it feels good or, because it is useful. These are not complex motivations, right? And like, so when I don't mean that pejoratively. Like, I understand, like, you should be able to understand villains, right? You know, the thing that makes them compelling is actually, I think, their virtues, right? Like, what's good about the villain, right? Charisma is a virtue, right? Honor is a virtue, right? Intelligence is a virtue, right? What makes a villain compelling is what's good about them, actually, right? And I mean, like, actually good, right? Trying to think of Batman villains, right? Like, the Joker is charismatic, right? He's not stupid. The evil, he has an unwavering conviction, right, to his mania. I'm thinking of like the Ledger incarnation here, right? Like he is a man on a mission, right? That's admirable in a sense. Now the mission is evil, right? But what makes a villain compelling is their virtues, and bravery is a virtue, right? So like you need to give your villain something actually likable about them, right? I think that's where I think that's what makes them compelling, right? Now, what's compelling about them could be their suffering, right? Like, it could be their tragic past, right? Because you can relate to that, right? In the same way, because you can relate to characters either empathetically, right, or sympathetically, or aspirationally, right? You can relate to a character because they have something you don't have, right? Like maybe you're a coward, right? So you admire a character because they're brave, good or evil, right? You relate to a character or identify with a character because they're like you in some way, right? Or because you've experienced something that they've experienced. Those are sort of the three reasons, right? And if you give a character any of those things, hero or villain, they're compelling, right? But I think what's especially attractive in a villain is a good quality. And maybe that, maybe that's the thing. As far as what's better, de gustibus non disputandum, right? Am I a fan of Game of Thrones? Yes, although my love has cooled as a consequence of the show ending so poorly. The most recent book had the strongest religious elements, in my opinion. Did I always plan on that, or did I make the decision later on? Broadly speaking, I always planned on it. The sort of precise delivery has sort of changed as I have grown and things, but the basic plot has not really changed at all. Daryl, I just emailed Broken Binding again about the Patreon copies. I do not have an answer yet, but as soon as I have your books, you will have them. I am super sorry. They haven't gotten them to me yet. So yeah, as soon as I know, I'll know. But I emailed them again today about it, or yesterday. Let's see. let's see. Technically, all fiction is real because we're thinking about it and altering the world because of it, i.e., drawings, right? Yeah, no, that's totally true, right? This is related maybe to the dragon point from earlier, which like I know I say that like all the time, um, but uh, but no, fiction is like true because it like interacts like in the so we don't interact directly with the world, right? Like you've never seen objective reality because your senses suck, right? Your vision literally is upside down and has holes in it that your brain fills in, right? And like you don't understand things, you know, you're limited by your cognition, you're limited by your sensory perceptions, right? You're limited by your, you know, human flesh, right? um you know, and fiction is sort of in that interstice, right? Because when you talk about symbols in literature, right, we talked about dragons earlier, right? Those symbols represent things that are in your environment as a human being, that your brain understands in symbolic terms, right? You know, you have a sort of symbol of like a lion in your head right now. You don't probably live in an environment where you're going to encounter a lion, right? But like you know, you have like vague ideas, right, for how you would interact with one if you were to run into one. And and stories exist fundamentally. Stories are like the uniquely human thing, right? Like other animals kind of talk, right? You know, or use tools, but stories are human, and make us human. We use stories to impart experiences without having to live them, right? That's what storytelling is fundamentally for. You can tell a story, right, so that, you know, the kids know not to go in the river at night or to try and jump over that canyon because they will die, right? So you tell a story about a kid who did try to jump over the canyon and died so that they won't do it, right? um and this is true of like religious stories and mythological stories. It's true of fantasy, right? And where I get very critical of modern fantasy is that like it's usually maybe it's the result of like one guy instead of like folklore is like the result of like a tradition, right? And so it ends up being smarter because it's built by like 100 people instead of like one person. And like not everybody is as, and that's why I like fantasy that's like plugged into these traditional narratives, right, in some way, or to history, because it's like more deeply sort of sourced, if that makes sense. But like fiction is true because it like relates to this symbolic language that our consciousness relates to reality with, if that makes sense. It's just not true in like a literal scientific sense, right? There isn't actually a fire breathing flying dragon anywhere. Darn. Or hooray, since, you know, nobody's house has been burned down by one. But I don't even read Sun Eater. I just dig Ruocchio's takes. Villeneuve's Dune is trash. It is not ideal. That is for sure. It's not my Dune. Hashtag not my Dune. Have I ever read Robin Hobb's books? I have not. I think I would really like them, but I have not read them. She's compared to Lois Bujold frequently. And I love Bujold, as I said earlier. So, just in terms of like their character work and stuff. But I rewatched the Bakshi Lord of the Rings film for the first time in 15 years. What are my opinions on that adaptation? So I haven't seen it in about 15 years, but I remember not liking it at all. But I'm like totally open to changing my mind. Mr. J, thank you. Speaking of the Joker, I thanks for picking up a copy. I hope you like the new one. Coffee, what's up? Been a while. I got a wide cam. It does like weird. So it's actually my phone, and it like the aspect ratio like changes sometimes. I don't know exactly. Glad you like the Diamond Edition though. I am glad that it is almost all over. Let's see. Which of my characters would I want to meet the most, excluding Hadrian? Well, Hadrian's the answer, but you know, I think Lorian and Polino would be the most fun. Probably. Have I ever read Dostoevsky? Sure, 100%. Would I recommend Count of Monte Cristo? Yes. This is one of those times though, if you're not sure, that I would like totally be cool with recommending the abridged version. Those French novels were serialized and they were written by the chapter. And while the unabridged version of Count of Monte Cristo is amazing, if you're not sure if you would like it or you'd vibe with the older literature in translation, unless you can read the French, which I cannot, then maybe do the abridged version, which I think is super super awesome. So no, I don't know what the Talk to a podcast is, so I don't know. Gip says, bro. I say, bro. Back at you. Do I like video games? Hell yeah. What did I grow up playing? I was a big Nintendo kid growing up, and I still I own every Nintendo console, at least the mainline ones. So I have the theoretical capability to play whatever Nintendo game I want at any given moment. But I was also like way behind. My parents were pretty hesitant about video games, and so I got a Super Nintendo like a couple years before the GameCube came out, so I was like a little ways behind for a long time. But as a consequence of this, I think it was, and then I caught up for GameCube. But like early childhood, I was like way behind. But as a consequence of this, I really love Legend of Zelda. Obviously, growing up, I was a big like Zelda Mario kid. I didn't really get into like Sega ever. So Sonic's always been like kind of over there. But I had the GameCube, and it was on the GameCube that I really started to play like RPGs. The GameCube didn't have many, but it did have Tales of Symphonia and Baten Kaitos, which are among the best in my opinion. And then I went over. I did a little PC gaming, but my my dad forced us all to move over to Linux in the house, and so playing video games on PC basically was impossible for a long time. And I moved over to get an Xbox so I could play Halo. And I played that. Obviously, like who didn't, right? I was the right age for that to be the thing, right? But continued to play a bunch of RPGs over on that end. And then I am a huge From Software fan, which I was a From Software fan before it was cool. I bought Dark Souls 1 on release because my roommate was a big Demon Souls fan. And so I actually returned it because I was like, this game is unplayable. It is terrible. And then like a year later, the DLC came out, and I was like, oh, this game is awesome. Actually, I was stupid. And so I've been a From Software fan ever since. Lately, I'm playing the new Atlas game. I'm playing Metaphor, which is pretty good. It is pretty anime, but it is pretty good. The music is amazing. But no, I most of my entertainment is video games at this point, because I don't like keep up with fiction the way that like y'all do. Most of my reading is like history and other sort of nonfiction stuff now, but I do play a lot of video games, or as much as I can. Metaphor has taken me more than a month at this point because I can only play like 45 minutes to an hour at a time. Work and parenthood being what they are. Let's see. Irish Knight, what's up? I'm doing all right. Very tired, and we are getting close to 2-hour mark actually, but I haven't caught up with the chat yet. I'm trying. Usually, I catch up with the chat before we hit 2 hours. But repent and play Ring City. It is so good. Yeah, no, I will. I will. I will one day. I actually was replaying. I replayed Dark Souls 1 with my friend, and we were working on Dark Souls 2. We brought another friend in, and that other friend has not been as available. So we stalled out. Need to get back in it, because replaying Dark Souls 3 and actually doing the DLC was next on the docket, but we dropped the ball. Just started Swing Year I stole from Dune and Book of the New Sun. That is correct. I did. I hope Timothée Chalamet sues me. Yes. Yeah. Yes. One of these days. Complete sarcasm though. How was Dragon Steel? It was good. Was I able to 1v1 Sanderson for paper rights? No, there was no 1v1ing. Although they did have a bunch of like HEMA exhibition fighting the whole time, which was super cool. There's so much potential to expand your lore. Where do I want to spend my time? More world building or moving on to new worlds? I mean, I will do more Sun Eater stuff, 100%, but I will probably do a different thing next. I do not have the brain for the economics question at the moment. Awesome. How do I write politics or controversy in a story that is not from current issues at the time? It would be difficult since people will tie a subject to the story. Well, like, look, people will always assume that like you're writing about today in some way. This is unavoidable, but it is also like very baby brain. The object, right, in creating a world, right, I think, I'm with Tolkien on this, should be to create a world. It should not be to create a polemic about our world, right? Like, I want to create a time and a place with cultures that are distinct, whose morals are distinct, right, from our time and place, whose concerns are distinct from our time and place, and to ask the question, right, like, what does that culture look like? And for like no deeper reason than that, right? Because I want those characters and that world to be of itself. I don't want it to be, necessarily a comment, right? Now, Tolkien makes the point, right, that like applicability is better than allegory, right? By which he means that like if then from that, right, you see something that is about today, that's fine. But my goal as a writer is not to tell you how to think, right? I am not in politics. All right. That is not my objective. My objective is to make you think, right? But to entertain you, and to entertain you by making you think, right? And that's it. Like, my object as a craftsman is to build a thing, right? And that thing is a world with people and cultures and its own history and technology and all that stuff, because that's fun. Like, I would do this for no money, and I have done this for no money. I did this for no money for most of my life. And so the thing is that you try to build a thing that is the best thing that you can build. You try to build a world, right? In the same way that if you were a carpenter, you build a chair, right? That's the best chair that you can make. A fantasy world has a lot more moving parts than a chair, has a lot more parts than a chair, period. But you just try to make it its own thing. And if people see lessons in that, right? Because like, I'm not saying you shouldn't be trying to say something, right? Of course you're trying to say something, right? But you should be saying something through the medium of creating a world and a story. You shouldn't be preaching. I'm not writing a sermon, right? I have no intention of changing anybody's mind, right? I just want you to have fun, right? But part of the fun is thinking, right? So I don't worry about any of that stuff. When I'm writing, the reader is dead, actually. I don't really care how you all will react in the moment. My concern is telling a story that's the best story I can tell, because I don't want you ultimately to feel as though you've wasted your time. But I don't think about your concerns and your reactions and your feelings as I'm writing. It's just me and the story. I am most alone in the way that like you're alone if you're walking in the wilderness, when I am at this desk writing the story by myself. Why did I kill Michael Mann in Disquiet Gods? Is it because he never filmed Heat 2? Not that Michael Mann. Michael Mann is the aforementioned college roommate, actually, who is actually a geologist. And I asked him if he wanted to die horribly in space, and he said, hell yeah. So that's actually a friend of mine. So, yeah. Reading Empire. Are there any key touchstone books for 3, 4, 5, 6 the way that Dante was for 2? Off the top of my head, not especially. There's a lot of 1984 in 4, for example, but it's not as central, and it's not as pulled throughout. I think this might have been a missed opportunity in a sense. I think it would have been nice if there were single works that were individually referent in the same way that Dante works for book 2. Sorry. What is my favorite Christmas gift? Something that I would not have thought to buy, but I'm like, but is like a nice surprise, right? The best Christmas gift, obviously, is one that you're not expecting, right? One you didn't ask for, but that is perfect, right? Doesn't matter. It doesn't matter, right? Like what it is, right? But if you're just like, oh man, this is really cool. Like I didn't know this existed, whatever, right? Um, but yeah. No. Like best I ever received though, I don't know. I have to think about it. Would I ever come to Southern California? Sure. I have been. I was there in 2019. One of these days. Uh, paganism is pretty regular sacrificial logic. That's closer to hard magic systems than those systems are to lit RPG. I disagree. I disagree. I think the concerns of contemporary hard magic systems are not sacrificial, or ritualistic at all. There's virtually no liturgy in modern fantasy. They are purely questions. They have much more in common with sort of a modern understanding of alchemy. If we want to like really stretch for an academic source, really what they have in common with is mana systems. There is a sacrificial logic in paganism, whether that's Western European paganism or Central Asian paganism, or the more refined versions we see in contemporary Hinduism. But the logic there is very different from eat a block of iron to channel fireball. Like it's very different. But I hear you, right? The objection that I received, right, when over the last few years when I would champion soft magic was that folkloric systems have a systematicity to them, right? But the logic in sort of Greco-Roman paganism fundamentally is I will make a sacrifice to propitiate the gods, and they will either give me something or they will not punish me in some way, right? But it's not a question of the amount necessarily, right? It's orthopraxic fundamentally, right? You do this thing to achieve this, right? The logic is if I give something up, I will get something, right? Or I will pay a tax basically, right, to the gods. I will give them something and I will not be punished, right? It's not a question of like if you were to ask a Greek, right? Like how many goats do I need to sacrifice in order to get the gods to give me a wind that will take me away, right? You can't the hard magic writer would actually try to tell you how many BTUs of body heat, right, you need to harvest from however many goats, right, in order to summon up the necessary mana to conjure a wind to blow you to Troy. And it turns out actually you need to kill Iphigenia, right? But the reason that Agamemnon must sacrifice his daughter, right, is not because she has enough energy in her in order to blow his fleet to Troy, right? He has to sacrifice her because she is appropriate, right, in some way, right? That is what the gods want. And why do the gods want that, right? These questions are deeper questions than how many BTUs of body heat, right, do I need to generate a sufficient wind to blow everybody across the ocean? And the modern fantasy writer would go the direction of BTUs in almost every case. Is basically my contention. Maybe I'm putting that too strongly, but the concern would be energy. It would not be the paganic question of what is the appropriate sacrifice to propitiate the gods, right? It would be something else. So but I will do a couple more questions and then I need to go. My wife is asking where I am. Did I play the Bat and Kaitos remasters? No, I learned they didn't have the English dubs, which are terrible, but I love them, so I have been putting it off. I was gonna jump right into it when I picked them up, but then I was like, oh no, it's Japanese only, and I was much sadder. Do I know about Quinn's ideas? He's basically YouTube authority on Dune. Yes, I do. No, he's great. He's great. I've watched a ton of Quinn's videos in my time. including for books that I have never read. Just makes great videos. Yeah, I'm never gonna catch up on the chat on this one, guys. I probably actually need to go. Jenna is looking for me. Have I seen Dune Prophecy? Yeah, I watched half an episode and it is not good. That was enough for me. All right, everybody. I am gonna cut and run until next time, ladies and gentlemen. Until next year, ladies and gentlemen. Farewell.